Hello everyone, and welcome to the very first section of the Optimum Health Masterclass, at least the very first section after the introduction anyway. This is all about decision making and more specifically the OODA Loop, which is a really awesome, in-depth decision making process codified by John Boyd. But before we get into all that, let's talk a little bit more about what you can expect from this section of the class. Decision making, especially in the 21st century, in the new world of food that we're faced with, is critically important if we want to establish optimum health. There's a reason why we make the same decisions we always do, which is like going on a diet plan to lose weight or over-the-counter medications to try to cover up ailments that we have on a daily basis that happen so often that we think it's normal. And really, we need to get out of that frame of mind. Making decisions to improve your health, become optimally healthy in the new 21st century world of food is so critically important. And that's what this section is all about. You're going to hear the OODA Loop referenced in many sections going forward because this is so foundational to learn this decision-making process to help change your life. And really, this goes beyond just making better decisions too about the foods that we eat or our health. The OODA Loop is useful in just about any decision-making process you'll ever find yourself in. And once we understand the OODA Loop and the decision-making process properties that come along with it, we can empower ourselves to make better decisions going forward about anything. But in this case, of course, we're talking about health, wellness, and the foods that we eat. So let's go ahead and get into the OODA Loop. The OODA Loop was a decision-making process that was developed by John Boyd, who was a military fighter pilot in Korea, I believe it was. He had a lot of other contributions to the military besides just the OODA Loop. He helped to develop such things as a lot of modern-day fighter pilot maneuvers that are used today. So some of his ideologies and methodologies were instrumental in the development of the iconic F-16 and F-15 fighter jets. So really smart guy. Now the OODA Loop and John Boyd are two things that not many people have really heard much about. And the reason is because John Boyd never really documented the OODA Loop. He would put on hours-long training sessions about the OODA Loop, but never really documented it. And so the information that we have about the OODA Loop today has been pieced together from notes, from recorded seminars that he put on, and things along those lines. So today, the OODA Loop is still used by the military, and it's used by other governments and elite organizations around the world. And now, of course, we are going to use the OODA Loop to learn how to make better decisions about our health and wellness and about the foods that we eat. This is so powerful. The OODA Loop, at a high level, is a constant improvement system that helps us to make better decisions and negotiate ambiguity, uncertainty, and those two things are always present in our environment. Ambiguity and uncertainty is a constant, and we can't ever expect those two things to go away. And really, when you think about it in the food and health paradigm, we're presented with information all the time that's conflicting and changing and evolving. And we have new scientific studies that come out with something different than what we heard before, and it's very confusing. And the OODA Loop helps us to make a lot more sense of all that ambiguity and all that change in our environment. To that point, it really helps us to adapt to this changing world and all these random circumstances we're faced with all the time. The OODA Loop really helps us to break out of old mental states and form new paradigms whenever we're presented with new information. So when we learn something new about our health, we can fold that into our decision-making process to form a new paradigm and get out of that old mental state that we've always been in before. And the OODA Loop is used by all of us every day. Every single time we make a decision, we go through an OODA Loop. And to go through an OODA Loop could take a half a second or could take years depending on the types of decisions that we are making. But we do go through the OODA loop whether we want to know about how the OODA loop works or not. And before we actually get into the OODA loop, the last thing I'd like to say, just to set this in your mind, is that the OODA loop is a journey, not an end. In other words, we don't just use the OODA loop to make a decision and then it's done. The OODA loop is an ever-evolving, constant improvement process, and we're going to use that to build a basis of optimum health that lasts for an entire lifetime. And that is why the OODA loop and decision making is so important to learn, and is so foundational for the rest of the information that is in this course. So let's go ahead and get into the OODA loop. What in the heck is the OODA loop? Well, OODA is actually an acronym, and it stands for Observe, Orient, Decide, and Act. So let's go through what each one of these mean. Observe, in its most simplistic form, is just gathering information. Just where can we get information from, no matter what source. It could be, TV or internet or watching a movie or talking to friends or whatever, but it's just gathering information. Now, when we orient, we're essentially making sense of the information that we've gathered. How do we take all these bits and pieces of information that we've gotten and put it together in a way that makes sense to us so that we can do something with it? Which of course goes right on to the next section, which is decide. Now we're deciding what to do with this information we've oriented with. So typically when we orient, and we're going to get into this in just a minute, we'll orient with a few different options. A few different ways of potentially orienting that situation. So when we decide, we're essentially deciding based upon a number of options. We take the best option and we then move on to the next section, which is act. We're acting upon that decision. Now, if you don't act, then the decision doesn't really make any difference because there's no outcome if you don't actually act, unless the decision is actually not to act. Regardless, once we've acted, we have created a new situation based upon the information that we've brought in. That action is going to have an outcome, and that outcome is going to be good or bad or somewhere in the middle. Regardless of where it is, that outcome from our action becomes an observable event, hence the loop. So when we act, we're essentially observing what happened with our action. What happened when we made that decision, we acted upon it. Well, if it was something good, we'll observe that it was something good. If it was something bad, we'll observe that it was something bad. And that's why this is called the loop. So it enables us to continuously improve based upon our decisions and actions. We then put that right back into the information gathering bucket of observe, and we're constantly improving upon this process. Now, at the surface, the OODA loop looks like it's pretty simplistic. Okay, I'm observing, we're orienting, we're deciding, we're acting. Very simple. But the OODA loop is actually a very deep and quite interesting subject. And we're going to get into the more intricate pieces of the OODA loop. And these intricate pieces is where the power lies. It's where we can really understand how the OODA loop works and make this work to make better decisions about our health and wellness for the rest of our lives. Let's start with observe. So first of all, when we're observing, we're going to get good information. This is good factual information that's usable. And of course, that's what we always want. But the problem is that good information is not what we always get. And so we have to be mindful of that in any situation where we're gathering information. Which brings us to the next thing here, is bad information. We're going to get bad information. We're going to get information that is either no good, out of context, just bad, and for whatever reason, we cannot use the information. Well, next up, we've got missing information, and this is going to be universal. You're always going to be missing some bits and pieces of information. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. It could be because, number one, we didn't even know to get the information. And in a situation like that, that's what we call you don't know what you don't know, right? You didn't even know to get the information. You didn't know what you didn't know. The other piece of missing information is that maybe it's not even available. Maybe science hasn't uncovered something yet, or who knows? There's an infinite number of reasons, but whatever reason, you're missing information here. Next up, we've got incomplete information. This is where we've got bits and pieces of stuff, but we just don't have the whole picture. Next up is really information that is totally out of context, or it's implied information. So let me give you an example of a piece of information that's out of context, and something that you're going to learn a little bit more later on in this course. Let's say, for example, a piece of information comes in from a scientific study out there that says that saturated fat is bad for you. It's going to kill you. It gives you heart disease, it clogs up your arteries, and you need to stay away from saturated fat. Well, that is a fact. That can happen with too much saturated fat in your diet, no doubt about it. But the truth is saturated fat is only one small piece of the story when we're talking about heart disease. When we're talking about saturated fat in combination with high carbohydrate diets, especially coming from wheat, now we're talking about a very deadly combination. Wheat-based products and high carbohydrates combined with saturated fat is a recipe for disaster as far as our health. So it's a fact that saturated fat can clog up your arteries. There's no doubt about that. And too much of it, even in the right situations, can be bad. Too much of anything, of course, can be bad for our health. But to just say that saturated fat will kill you is out of context. That's not the whole story. And so that's what this section means, is that you might get information that's out of context or it's implied. So if I were to say to you, in other words, that saturated fat is bad for you, you need to stay away from saturated fat, that's implying that you need to stay away from hamburgers or steak or chicken or whatever, right? Or coconut oil. For example, in this situation, coconut oil is loaded with saturated fat, but that's not the whole story. So the next thing up is unfolding circumstances, and that is what it sounds like. Obviously, as you're gathering information about anything, things are going to change while that is happening. And you might see a scientific study and about say saturated fat, since we're talking about that anyway. And then in the middle of all this information gathering, you see something that totally contradicts it or changes the situation, and you have unfolding circumstances. Things are changing as you're going. Well, next is uncertainty. All of these things feed uncertainty. So to put this into perspective, whenever you're gathering information, how do you know that the information that you're getting is good information, or if it's bad, or if it's just out of context? How do you know that you're getting all of the information and that you're not missing something important? All that adds up to uncertainty, and uncertainty will be a constant. It will always be there. It never goes away, and we have to expect that it's going to be a part of the OODA loop no matter how good we are at this. There will always be uncertainty in the system. Next up is inundation. Information inundation. So when we think about TV, radio, the media, propaganda, magazines, movies, just all kinds of input we're absolutely saturated with on a day-to-day basis. Inside of all of that is all kinds of information about health and wellness. You might see scientific studies or a news report about some sort of a subject on health, and then there's some celebrity comes out and says that they lost 30 pounds, in a week or something. I don't know. And, got back on the beach or whatever it is that it is. You're inundated with both subliminal, subconscious, I think is maybe a better word, information, and then we're getting information that's very much in our face, from news reports on health or diet plans or whatever. And this is both solicited and unsolicited. So it is washing over us and inundating us all the time. So making sense of all that information, all this good information, this bad information, everything else can be quite a chore whenever we're being inundated with information. So having gone through the observe column here, let's go ahead and move on to orient, because we've got to now take all this information and try to make sense of all this stuff to make better decisions about our health. So the first thing that I want to talk about under orient, and it's probably one of the most important things, is how we orient this information, and we do it based upon models or paradigms. Here's what I mean by that. Let me put you into a hypothetical scenario here. Let's say that a year ago, you went on a diet plan and you lost 10 pounds in 1 month. But now you have an event coming up in, say, 3 weeks. And in 3 weeks, you want to lose 15 pounds. Well, your circumstances today are different than they were a year ago. You want to lose more weight in a shorter period of time than you did in a year ago. But a year ago, you lost 10 pounds in a month and it worked out great for you. So now you may use that same model, in other words, that same diet plan, and just tweak it a little bit so that you can try to lose more weight in a shorter period of time. And that is the use of a model or a paradigm. The point here is that we want to make sure that we have as many mental models as possible so that we can make better decisions moving forward. The next thing up is previous experience, and that kind of goes along with previous models. I mean, you're using a previous experience that was either good or bad to help orient yourself with new information. The next one puts this together in a different perspective, and this is also a pivotal and important part of orienting the information. This is called should be versus what is. In other words, the brutal reality. Now here is what that means. When we take in information and we're trying to make sense of it, we might be making sense of information based upon the way we think things should be. In other words, if I go on this diet plan, I should lose X number of pounds per week or per month or whatever it is. The reality, or the brutal reality, is different potentially than what we think should be. So the brutal reality is that in this case, let's just use losing weight again. The reality of the situation isn't that you should lose weight so that you become healthy, so that you can be ready for this event. Losing weight does not drive health. It's actually the other way around. Health drives weight loss. So the brutal reality here is that we really want to become healthy so that we can attain the right weight and the right body shape that we should be. It actually changes the entire way you're orienting this information. In other words, if you focus on becoming healthy, you'll never have to worry about losing weight again, because being overweight or being sick cannot survive in a healthy state of being. So the brutal reality here is, rather than looking at trying to lose weight, you should be focused instead on becoming healthy. Losing weight will become the consequence. To build on that concept, the next bullet point down is social norms and heritage. Using the same scenario of, if you're going to lose weight, the social norm says, go on a diet. That's what we have been taught to do. That's the social norm. And then when we talk about heritage, it's really about tradition, right? You know, it might be a tradition to do a certain thing given a certain situation. However, in the new world of food, where, you know, foods are genetically modified and sprayed down with poison, and factory farm meats, which have very different nutritional characteristics than organic grass-fed meats, which we're going to learn a lot about later on in the course. Heritage can't work anymore. So we have to make changes to the social norms and the heritage in order to look at the brutal reality of the situation to better orient ourselves in today's new world of food. And that's what these bullet points work together to help us do. The next 2 bullet points, analysis and attempt validation, allow us in this case to analyze and validate the way that we've oriented the situation and to validate the observations that we've made prior to making a decision about it. That is the orientation phase. And once we've orientated ourselves to the observations and to the information, we move on to then deciding what we're going to do. When we orient ourselves with all the information, likely we're going to come up with a number of different potential ways that we can put all that information together to make decisions. And so we might have to decide upon a number of different options to decide what kind of action we're going to take. No matter what we do, no matter what we decide, and no matter how we orient, the information that we observe, we have to remember, is never going to be perfect. And so our orientation will therefore always be flawed, and the decisions that we make will always have some level of flaw. So we have to choose the best option when we're making decisions. Remember, this is an OODA loop. So as we're deciding what to do and then moving on to the next section, which is acting, we're going to have an outcome. And if the outcome isn't what you hoped for, it gives you the opportunity to refine your decision-making process by either observing new things or reorienting and making different decisions. So when we act, nothing else matters. This whole loop doesn't work unless we actually take action on what we have decided to do. And this is actually a testing phase, essentially. I mean, we might be making decisions, but we're really testing. We're going to test that action, and we're going to see what that outcome is and see if we oriented and decided correctly. If we didn't, we have an opportunity to continue this loop and to make continuous improvements. So that, at a high level, is what the OODA loop is and the power that we can have over the decision-making process. So now, going forward, when we're observing information about food and health, we can look a little bit more critically at whether or not the information that we're getting is good information or not, or if it's out of context and maybe not right for you. Maybe you're missing something. That allows you to reorientate, make different decisions, and act differently going into the future. But this isn't the whole story. When you consider the health of our society at large, autoimmune disease, heart disease, strokes, cancer, diabetes, obesity, these are all constants in our society. It's rampant. As a matter of fact, it's gotten so bad. These things are normal today. So if the OODA loop is something that we all use, and it's a constant improvement system, then why do we all keep making the same decisions? Why is it always the bad decision? Why do we continuously lose weight and then get it back again? Why do we get sick? Why do we have all these ailments? Why are we taking all these medications to cover up all these symptoms? Why do we try to exercise? And why do we run and walk and lift weights and do all these things only to be struck with some sort of another illness or ailment? Even though we think we're being good to our systems, why do we continuously make decisions that lead us down a path of ailments and health problems? There's 2 answers to that. One of them is called the closed loop effect, which is coming up here in just a moment in the next video. And the other one is mindset. And we have an entire section coming up about mindset. These 2 pieces are critical to understanding how it is that we use the OODA loop and how it is that we make the decisions we make. Once we get through these sections of the OODA loop, the closed loop effect, and mindset, you will be armed with everything that you need to know to take total control of your life forever, without diet plans, without counting calories, and making the same decisions that we've made before that have led us down the same path of ailments and problems and sickness. So stay tuned. The next video is all about the closed loop effect, and we get into why the OODA loop is closed and we always keep making the same decisions.